This is Sherry Myers in Las Vegas, and I kind of wanted to give everybody an update on my Toyota Motorhome's overheating issues. I have a V6 3.0 EFI-VZE is what it is, and I purchased this in, I thought it was May, but my paperwork says June of 2015, and it had an overheating problem. We didn't know it. They didn't tell us. The guy that used to own it was dead. His family was selling it. They didn't know a lot about it, except that they had put in a new radiator. So anyway, the first thing we did when we bought it was take it to a mechanic. They checked everything out and said everything was good, but they replaced the radiator hoses, the radiator fluid, and did the brakes and a smog check so we could get it licensed. We then went on a camping trip, our first camping trip, and it overheated. So everybody said, it's just probably the thermostat. The idiots probably didn't change the thermostat. So we took it to a mechanic and had the thermostat done, and of course they put in new coolant. And it overheated. So the next thing they did was we decided that it was probably the fan clutch. So instead of putting in another fan clutch, I did some research and I put in this fan. It's a electric fan. Let me see if I've got that written down somewhere. It's a Flexolite fan, I'm pretty sure. And it was still overheating. So the next thing that we did was the water pump and the timing belt. And at that time, they also did what's called a leak down test to check if the heads were leaking, and they weren't. And there was no exhaust fumes in the radiator. So that was all okay. So we replaced the radiator cap, and we went on a second camping trip, and it overheated. That time that it overheated, it actually blew up the radiator. We were out of town, so we stopped in St. George, Utah, and got a new radiator installed. He said it looked like the radiator had something poured into it, like a radiator stop leak or something. It was a new radiator, but maybe that was something that was in the engine, whatever. It blew up. He did what he called his pressure block flush, and pressure checked the system. Everything was good. That's the guy that did the radiator. And on our way we went, and it overheated on the way back to Las Vegas. We then did the blue dye combustion test. No combustible gas detected in the radiator. We did a compression check on it, and we had 170 pounds in 5 of the cylinders and 155 in the 6, or in one of the cylinders. We then tested all of the radiator thermostats that we had, and they all worked. We put in a Toyota thermostat. We then went ahead and got new spark plugs. I went and decided to take it to another radiator company and had them reflush the radiator again, do a pressure check on the coolant system. They were the ones that installed the Toyota thermostat, and it was still overheating. So went ahead and did the head gasket check and had Toyota replace the head gaskets. At the same time, they did the valve seals and valve adjustments. We put in new plug wires, readjusted the timing, left the dealership, and it was still overheating. So after that, I decided to go to a special Toyota shop that works on performance 4x4 vehicles for off-road racing, and their recommendation was to put in this oversized radiator, which is a CSF 2057. It was also recommended to me by people on the Toyota Motorhome forum, so I went ahead and did that. It's still overheated. He recommended then that I put water wetter in it with distilled water. I did that. I went on a camping trip and it didn't overheat. I thought, yay, everything's solved, I'm good. Except at the time it was the fall and it was only about 80 degrees out, and I didn't overheat, but as soon as the weather warmed up, it started overheating again. I decided to go ahead and get a new muffler and catalytic converter installed, because some people said that perhaps there was some kind of a backup in the exhaust system that was causing it to overheat. It didn't think so, but what the hell. Put in a new catalytic converter and muffler, and it's still overheated. So the next thing that I did was install my mister system, because at this point I had a lot of money in it and I hadn't been doing a lot of anything else than putting money in it. So I installed my mister system. So let me show you what my mister system is. This by far had made the biggest difference. I had done some testing by driving the vehicle up and down to Mount Charleston and determined that I could stop the radiator from overheating as long as I cooled it down sufficiently. Because of course our ambient temperature here in Las Vegas during the summertime is easily over 100 degrees, especially on the asphalt. So this is my mister system. It has 4 nozzles. That one's not working right now. I always check this before I drive it anywhere, because this is my lifesaver. I don't know why this one's not working, but I'll fix that. And I pushed out the radiator a little bit so I can easily get it inside here. And I'm always having to check these nozzles because of the water here in Las Vegas is so hard. It really gunks up these nozzles fast. I have a little bag of vinegar that I keep my replacement nozzles in, so I always take those with me. Anyway, this goes right in here, and we run that mister whenever we're driving the vehicle. And that keeps it from overheating. However, after this last season, I decided to do a chemical engine block flush, and I flushed a bunch of gunk out of what seemed like the engine, and I thought I saw oil in the fluid of the radiator. So I decided that either the heads were blown again or something was going on. So I had the engine rebuilt, figuring that the heads were blown and the coolant ports were blocked. So I had the engine rebuilt. The mechanic that R&R'd it put it all back together, and I took it for a test drive, and the temperature gauge said the engine was overheating. That was the stock temperature gauge. However, because of my mister system and everything else that I've got going on with the fan, it actually doesn't overheat here at the radiator. The engine says it's overheated, but I'm not boiling over or using any kind of radiator fluid or losing any kind of radiator fluid. Went back to the mechanic, went back to the engine rebuilder. The engine rebuilder says, well, it's not the engine. The mechanic says, I don't know what the fuck it is, excuse my language, and just drive it. I'm like, no. He says, well, let's put in a mechanical gauge so we can actually see maybe your gauge isn't working, because it wasn't overheating, remember. So I went ahead and put in a mechanical gauge. It said that it was overheating. It would bury that gauge past 250. So went back to the mechanic. I said, it's still overheating. What am I going to do? I showed him the transmission cooler, but he said he didn't think that was going to do anything. But I went ahead and put one in because I didn't know what else to do. I put in this fancy transmission cooler. See it? And it helped a little bit. A little bit, not much. So I was like, okay, now what am I going to do? So my next thing that I've done, and this is why I'm making this video, is to show everybody my next job that I've done, is I went ahead and installed a second radiator. I was going to say, what? Installed a second radiator? I didn't know what else to do. I look at my picture. Let me show you my picture. In my book here. I study and study what's going on with my engine issue here. Here's the picture that I look at. Study and study and study this. Everything's cool up here. Everything's cool. It's hot back here. This is where my temperature gauge goes to, the intake manifold. It's hot. You can tell it's hot when you're running it. It's hot. The temperature gauge says that the engine's 250 degrees or more. He says, just go ahead and drive it. I'm like, I don't think so. I just spent $4,000 on that engine. I'm not going to seize it up by driving it at those temperatures. So I installed a second radiator. This is a fluid coolant system from Derail. Right here. I installed it on the hood of my vehicle. I use the tubes that would have gone to my heater core. My heater core started leaking, so it was bypassed anyway. It's not like I need a heater in Las Vegas. I need to be able to run my air conditioner. That's what I have to be able to run. I don't need to run my heater. So here's how I bypassed it. It goes into the coolant, the Derail radiator system, and comes out. And it has a fan, which the way I've got it wired right now, well, I don't have it wired permanently yet, is it sucks air from outside through the radiator, then against the hood and out. I did a test drive day before yesterday, and it seemed to work. We're going to go camping this weekend. It's going to be 100 degrees to 106 degrees on the asphalt. That means it'll be at least 110 degrees. I know that I look like Mad Max with all of these gadgets that I've got going on, but nobody can tell me why my engine's overheating. And I've done just about everything that I know of to preserve my engine by keeping the temperature as cool as I can. I will, if this works, I will eventually get a custom brush guard made for the front end of it and a fancy hood scoop to cover my second radiator. And I'm going camping this weekend. I'm going to run the air conditioner as I drive out to my favorite camp spot, and I will let you know how everything works.